Hello guys, welcome to Dawn to Night Stare. I know you guys come here to relax and take a nap, so before we go, please hit like and subscribe. By the way, also tell me what time and where you guys listening from. Alright then.
Most of Arthur's early years unfolded within the same confined stretch of the Redwood Wilderness. He lived there with his mother, Alara, in a rustic cottage she claimed to have single-handedly constructed. For a time, he believed her, but now he suspected she had merely discovered an abandoned structure and painstakingly repaired it. Winters in the cottage were brutally cold, the meager fires in their hearth offering little warmth. Many nights found Arthur and Alara huddled together beneath a single blanket. Summers, conversely, brought a suffocating humidity, making the very wood of the cottage seem to sweat. Often, they chose to sleep outdoors despite the relentless clouds of mosquitoes, which his mother's makeshift netting of old fabrics did little to deter. A multitude of insect bites was a small price to pay for avoiding dehydration from sweat. Their days were a rhythm of survival. Alara hunted small game for their meals, while Arthur gathered firewood and foraged for berries. Occasionally, they would allow themselves a reprieve, spending an afternoon singing or reading from Alara's small collection of books. But sustenance was paramount, demanding constant effort to secure food and fresh water. Arthur's mask complicated foraging. He constantly adjusted the heavy cotton sheet to align the eye holes with his gaze, and would often become drenched in sweat within an hour. The only time he ever removed it was when Alara bathed him. He would try to catch a glimpse of his reflection in the murky water, but it was never clear enough. He wondered if Alara had ever truly seen his face. Surely she must have, the day he was born. Arthur learned early on not to press his mother with questions about the mask or his appearance. The only response he ever received was that if he dared to remove it in front of someone, something terrible would happen. If he pushed further, her voice would firm, "I am your mother, and you must trust that I know what is best." And for a long time, he did. Alara was Arthur's entire world. He loved her with the intense devotion only a secluded boy could feel. Their time together was constant, and his memories of her were mostly happy. Yet, darker recollections were interwoven, some even outright horrifying. He recalled an instance when he was perhaps 5 or 6. He was playing in their garden, while Alara worked on laundry across the yard. Arthur hopped through the soft soil, crushing any pests he spotted. Seeing their ruptured forms beneath his shoes filled him with a primitive satisfaction, a sense of contributing, however small, to their survival. He drifted to the end of the garden, where his mother kept several rabbits in a cage, caught in traps and bred for meat. Alara had warned him not to become attached, as they would all eventually be eaten. But of course he had given them names and loved to poke his fingers through the wire to feel their soft fur. One of the females, whom he had named Lily after a character in one of Alara's books, was watching him. She chewed on the vegetation in her mouth as he approached. Unlike the others, she didn't scurry away, but continued to meet his gaze. The curious way she observed him brought a faint smile to his lips beneath the mask. They stared at each other for a long moment before an inexplicable urge compelled him to untie the twine from his neck. It fell to the ground, and slowly, he pulled the mask away from his face. Louis's gaze remained unwavering as he moved his bare face closer to hers. A strange warmth enveloped him. The sensation of being truly seen by someone, even a simple creature like a rabbit, was almost euphoric. The rabbit didn't flinch or cower as he had half expected, given his mother's fervent insistence on his face remaining hidden. If there was something terrible about it, Lily showed no sign. She regarded him no differently than she might Alara or another rabbit. His smile widened, brighter than ever before. "Arthur!" Alara's voice suddenly sliced through the air from around the corner. He fumbled to retrieve the mask from the ground and pull it back on, but it was too late. Alara grabbed his shoulder, her eyes wide with alarm, and delivered a sharp smack to the back of his head, blurring his vision. "Put your mask back on, right now," she cried, her voice trembling. He obeyed, and she yanked him away from the scene, leaving Lily still staring at the spot where he had stood. Lily was their dinner that night. Arthur didn't need to be told. He had watched from his bedroom window as Alara took Lily from the cage. He listened to her frantic squeaks before the swift, terrible snap that likely signified her neck breaking, Alara's usual method for dispatching their meals. Lily lay as a charred heap in the center of the table that evening. Alara tore off one of her legs and placed it on his plate. "Eat," she commanded. Tears streamed inside his mask as he pulled down the mouth hole slightly. He picked up Lily's leg and brought it to his lips. "Eat," she yelled, her voice sharp. He took a bite of the unseasoned meat, tearing it from the bone. His eyes closed as he chewed and swallowed. Alara nodded, satisfied, and began eating some breast meat. "Do you understand what could have happened if I had accidentally seen you without your mask?" she asked. "No. You won't tell me," he retorted, defiance coloring his voice. Alara paused, gathering her thoughts. She sighed, then offered her familiar, unwavering answer. "Something bad." Arthur's fingers explored his mask, poking at the small holes forming along the neck. He knew he would have a new one the first time he encountered another person. Like the previous one, this mask was crafted from cloth, but it was thicker, seemingly made from a heavy jacket. Despite its heft, it breathed better, making summer berry-picking excursions more tolerable. Arthur was 8 or 9 during one such trip. A few yards away, he spotted a bush laden with vibrant red berries. They generally avoided green ones, and most of what they ate was dark purple and often bitter. But the red ones offered a sweet, tangy flavor he sometimes still craved. He rushed towards them, his basket swinging. Still adjusting to his recent growth spurt, he moved awkwardly, almost flopping, until he reached the bush. As he approached, it shifted slightly, as if something was within. He moved closer, assuming it was a squirrel or some small creature he could easily shoo away. Instead, a mop of blonde hair peeked out from the side. He rounded the bush to see the back of a child. The child turned as soon as he drew near, revealing a blue-eyed, skinny blonde girl, roughly his age. Her hair tumbled past her shoulders, tangled with leaves. Dirt stains on her clothes and scratches on her bare legs suggested she had spent considerable time in the wilderness. "Hi," the girl said with a bright smile. Arthur instinctively recoiled a step. "Why are you wearing a mask? Are you a superhero?" she asked, a teasing laugh in her voice. "Superhero," Arthur echoed. "Yeah," she replied, reaching into her back pocket and pulling out a rolled comic book. She handed it to him, and he saw Captain Comet emblazoned on the cover. It was the first time he had ever seen anyone else in a mask, though this one looked far cooler than his own. "You should wear one like him instead," the girl suggested. The crunch of leaves behind him announced Alara's approach, her bow and arrow in hand. Her eyes widened when she spotted the girl. "Hello," the girl offered. Arthur watched Alara's hands tremble as she clutched the bow and arrow tightly to her side. Another sound came from behind the girl, and Alara quickly raised her weapon. It was a man with a thick brown beard. He spotted Alara instantly and threw his hands up in submission, slowly moving to shield the girl. "Who are you?" Alara demanded. Hello," he said. "I'm Silas, and this is my daughter Lena. We're camping nearby. Apologies, I wasn't aware we were on private land." Alara refused to lower the bow. "You need to leave." "Is this your property?" the man inquired. Alara bit her lip, her arms beginning to shake. "Yes," she asserted. "Would the ranger station confirm that if I called?" Alara's bow lowered a fraction. "Lena, why don't you go find some firewood?" Silas suggested. "But, Dad, go." Lena pursed her lips, glanced at Arthur, and then stomped away. "Look, if you're this deep in the woods, I assume you're hiding from something, just like we are," Silas said to Alara, then looked at Arthur and raised an eyebrow. "We don't want any trouble, and honestly, I don't care what you're doing out here." "See that spruce tree?" Alara said, pointing to the tallest one in the vicinity. "Don't cross it again, you or your girl." "You got it," Silas said with a smile. With that, Alara lowered her weapon. "I was just bluffing, by the way. I don't have a phone. Too easy to track." Alara grabbed Arthur by the arm and pulled him along as they started walking back towards the cottage. "If you ever want to trade some of your kills, let me know," Silas called after them. "We've got plenty of beans and rice." Alara ignored him. "We're in the travel trailer down the trail, about 2 miles," he shouted. Arthur looked back and saw the girl waving. He kept looking until they vanished into the distance. Arthur helped Alara gut the rabbit she had caught for dinner, holding the bag for the entrails as she ripped them from the small creature. Alara had been mostly silent since their encounter with the father and daughter in the woods, and Arthur couldn't discern if she was concerned or angry. He knew he should avoid mentioning it, but he couldn't help himself. "I thought you said there was no one else in these woods," he ventured as she placed a handful of viscera into the bag. "There weren't," she said flatly, "and I need to figure out a way to get rid of them." "Why?" he asked. "They didn't seem dangerous." She paused. "They didn't seem dangerous." She paused. "Everyone is dangerous, Arthur." He dropped his head, staring into the bag for a long moment, lost in the red and pink mixture that shifted with every slight movement. The image of the girl, Lena, popped into his head and lingered stubbornly. "You're thinking about her, aren't you?" Alara asked. Over time, Arthur had learned many mothers possessed an uncanny ability to predict their child's thoughts, or at least offer a good guess. "She was around your age." Arthur looked at Alara, then back into the bag. She dropped the rabbit onto the wooden slab and knelt in front of him. "I know you're lonely, but you know it has to be this way," she said gently before standing back up. "But why?" he pressed. "You never tell me." "I tell you that you need to trust me," she said, her voice firming again. "And that should be the only explanation you need." It wasn't, though. Whether it was the stirrings of adolescence or simply a breaking point, Arthur had already begun devising ways to sneak away and meet that girl again. "I know what will make you feel better," Alara said, removing her blood-stained gloves and going inside. She returned a few minutes later, holding something behind her back. She stopped in front of him, and his hands began to tremble with unaccustomed excitement. He had never received a gift before, never expected one. The thrill was a sensation he rarely experienced. She paused for a few more agonizing moments as he felt he was about to burst. Finally, she revealed what looked like a light brown mass, the color of a dying tree. She smiled as she handed it to him. It felt smooth and almost sticky. He pulled the edges apart to see that it was a new mask, but utterly unlike any he'd worn before. This one possessed actual facial features, a mouth with lips, a nose like Alara's, and eyebrows. "I made it with rabbit skins," she explained. "I thought you'd like having one that looks like an actual face." He stared at it, trying to appear grateful, but struggling to grasp his true feelings. "Well, try it on," she urged. He obeyed, pulling the thin leather across his head and down to his neck. It fit tightly against his head. The eye holes were perfectly situated, so he wouldn't have to pull the mask down to see. "You probably won't want to wear it in the summer, but I tried to make it more comfortable and durable than your last one." He breathed in the gamey scent of the leather, pressing his tongue against the inside of his mouth. "Well, what do you think?" she asked. "Thanks," he murmured, wishing it looked more like Captain Comet's. Alara was always utterly exhausted after a day of hunting, especially in the summer. It was almost impossible to rouse her once she fell asleep. One night, after she had drifted off, Arthur slipped out of the cottage and into the woods. He followed the path, remembering Silas's words about their travel trailer being 2 miles down the trail. As he walked in the darkness, he wondered why he was so driven to see Lena again. He had been content living his entire life with only Alara, though lately he had begun to question if that complacency was merely a product of his secluded existence. He had been walking for about half an hour when he heard voices a few yards away. He ducked into the nearby trees and spotted a fire glowing beside a dingy brown travel trailer. Silas sat in a chair by the fire while Lena danced around it. Arthur moved closer unintentionally, not realizing he was no longer hidden. Lena spotted him as she circled the fire. He watched her say something to her father before she came skipping towards him. "Hey, Captain Comet," she said. "I like your new mask." "Thanks," Arthur replied. "My name is Arthur." I like Captain Comet better," she insisted. "Come on, I told my dad I was going to pee, but I want to show you something." She grabbed his hand and pulled him deeper into the woods. Her hand was soft and warm, despite the chilly night. He remembered that, the lingering warmth of her hand on his for years to come. They walked a few more yards until she stopped at a small ditch with a thin stream at the bottom. She smiled at him before sliding down to the edge of the stream. Arthur paused before following. At the bottom, she caught his arm, preventing him from going face first into the creek. She laughed, and he found himself laughing too. "Look," she said, pointing into the creek. He scanned the surface of the dark water, unsure what she was indicating. "Tadpoles," she exclaimed with excitement. He looked again, and in the moon's reflection, he saw a tiny black dot swimming near the creek's edge. "They'll grow legs soon," she said. "That's what I learned in school." "Do you go to school?" He shook his head. "Yeah, I'm not right now, but my dad said I can go back soon when we leave the woods." Despite not knowing her well, the thought of her leaving caused a pang in his chest. "Lena," Silas's voice echoed from somewhere in the woods. "I gotta go," she whispered. "Come visit me again. Just whistle 3 times and I'll come find you in the woods." She climbed up the ditch and waved before disappearing. Arthur visited her only on nights when Alara was utterly exhausted. Sometimes Lena was already asleep when he arrived. They saw each other only once every couple of weeks, but those precious meetings compensated for all the longing in between. Seeing her was like witnessing sunshine after weeks of rain. During these late-night rendezvous, Lena shared stories of her life outside the woods, the friends she had back in her hometown, the restaurant she missed, the afternoons spent at their local library devouring books with the coolest covers. "Have you ever read The Secret Explorers?" she asked him one night. He shook his head. Alara had a small collection of books, most too dense to hold his interest. The only 3 he had truly read were about local wildlife and an old cookbook with faded letters. "Whenever I leave, you can visit me, and I'll let you borrow it," she said, hitting tall blades of grass with a stick. "I have the whole collection. Oh, and we can go to the movies. I love going to the movies. I used to go all the time with my mom and dad before they broke up." "Broke up?" Arthur asked. "Yeah, it's like when adults decide they don't like each other anymore, so they stop living together." She knew so much more than him about movies, books, the world, everything. "You've really lived out here your whole life, Captain Comet?" she asked. "Yeah, I think so," he said. "That's cool. You're like this guy in this movie I like called Wild Child, except you weren't raised by bears, right?" She laughed. They found a clearing and sat in the cool grass. Fireflies danced among the tall blades like tiny embers. They looked at each other, and she smiled, and he smiled back. She picked at the grass beside her, glancing at him intermittently. "Why do you wear a mask?" she asked, not looking up at him. He knew the question would eventually come, though he appreciated how long she'd waited. "My mom says something bad will happen," he said, wondering if he should have concocted a cooler reason. She picked at the grass for a few more seconds before standing up and dusting her hands. "Works for me," she said, offering her hand to help him up. And as they stood in the moonlight, Arthur knew there was no way his face could be as lovely as hers. Another year or so passed. Arthur was still frustrated with Alara for her secrecy, but he was relieved he no longer had to sneak out to meet Lena. They even started meeting in daylight, making it much easier to explore the woods together. He showed her all the things he had learned over the years, how to identify poisonous plants, how to navigate home if lost, and how to track animals. "Wow, you know a lot about the woods," she exclaimed. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" He shrugged. "Will you teach me how to shoot a bow and arrow?" she asked. Alara had only recently taught him, so he wasn't sure how adept he would be at teaching her. However, the earnest plea in her eyes prevented him from saying no. They found a spot near a clearing where Alara often hunted quails. They ducked behind a log, and Arthur rested the bow and arrow on top of it. A small flock of quail bobbed in and out of the tall grass. He picked out a large one closer to them and aimed the arrow just as Alara had taught him. The quail bobbed again, and he took a deep breath before releasing the arrow. The flock burst into the air, leaving the arrow on the ground, pointing skyward. They walked to the clearing and found the quail, struck through its chest by the arrow. "That was amazing," she cried. "I want to try." It was the first animal he had ever killed on his own, and he loved that Lena was there to witness it. It made him realize he wanted her there for all the significant moments in his life. They returned to the log with his quail and hid again. An hour passed before the flock returned, pecking at seeds and insects on the ground. He handed Lena the bow and arrow. "What do I do?" she asked, holding the bow and arrow at her sides. You have to show me, silly. He awkwardly moved towards her and placed his arms around her shoulders. He lifted her arm, holding the arrow, then the one holding the bow. He positioned them correctly, slowly. Her hair smelled of sweat and dirt, but he found he liked it. You have to aim and take a breath before shooting, he instructed. You need to make sure you're completely relaxed, and taking a breath helps. Okay, she said. How far do I pull the string back? He gulped before placing his hand over hers. She took a quick, startled breath, but quickly settled into his embrace. He cupped his hand around hers and pulled the string back. She looked at him and smiled. I think I got it, she said. He moved away, aware of his heart pounding harder than ever before. She aimed the arrow and took a breath. She released it, and the flock scattered. They both watched the arrow for a moment and saw it twitch. They ran to it and found a quail shot in the side. Arthur pulled the arrow out, and the tiny bird struggled to escape. Oh no, she whispered, her eyes welling with tears. It's okay, he said, picking up the quail and holding it between them. Do you think we can Before she could finish, he twisted the bird's neck, and it went limp. He held it out to her, and she stared at him wide-eyed. He cocked his head questioningly, but she looked away. It's okay, you can keep it, she said softly. They spent the rest of that day in a clearing close to her campsite. She poked at rocks with her pocket knife, staring into the forest without speaking. Arthur was about to ask her what was wrong when she dropped her head and began to sob. What's wrong? He asked. She looked up, then at him. I want to go home. Arthur's head dropped. I know my dad is hiding me from my mom, she confessed. He picked me up from school one day and told me we were going on a fun trip and that we'd go home soon. I believed him for a long time, but I'm not a stupid kid anymore. Arthur. I miss my mom. I miss my old friends. He knew she didn't mean to hurt him, but hearing all this stung. He had thought she was happy out here with him, that all they needed was each other. I want to leave, she said, and I want you to come with me. Arthur leaned back. Arthur leaned back. What? I can't leave. She pursed her lips and rested her head on her knees. Why do you wear that mask? I have to. Because your mom says. He paused, then nodded. Your mom's lying, just like my dad is. I bet you $1 million nothing will happen if you take off your mask right now. She moved her hand towards him and gripped the neck of the mask. He pulled back, and she let go. She paused and tried again, and this time he allowed her to untie the twine. Everything seemed to move in slow motion as she gently pulled upwards on the mask, careful to avoid yanking too hard around his nose and eyes. Everything went black as the last bit of the mask traveled up his face. But then, Lena's smiling face greeted him with the sun behind it. They stared at each other for several moments. See? Nothing, she said. And you don't have any hideous scars or anything. Really? He asked. She shook her head, then leaned in, kissing him on the lips. His eyes widened in surprise for a moment, but he quickly relaxed as it felt right, perfect. She pulled away and smiled again. His own smile was so wide his cheeks began to ache. Let's leave, tonight, she said. Tonight? She nodded. I can grab food and supplies to last us a while, and you can use your forest knowledge to lead us back to the road. Some adults will surely pick up 2 kids they see on the side of the road. I'll tell them where my mom lives, and we can go back there. Your mom would let me stay? He asked. She nodded. Of course. She stood up and offered her hand to him. He took it and pulled himself up. Meet me here when the moon is in the center of the sky, she said. 1,000 thoughts raced through Arthur's mind as he stood there, holding Lena's hand. He wondered if this was truly a good idea, if Alara would be okay without him, if he was ready to leave the woods, but he knew he could do all of it as long as he was with Lena. He nodded. She started out of the clearing with him a few feet behind her. She paused, causing him to stop. She stood still for several seconds, her arms at her sides, the pocket knife in her hand trembling. Lena? He asked. Are you okay? She turned to him, her eyes wide, her mouth clenched. Lena? He moved towards her, but she lifted the knife. He stood frozen as she moved it towards her head, holding it a few inches from her cheek. Lee. She plunged the knife deep into her face, and Arthur screamed. She pulled against the handle, dragging the blade along her face. He ran to stop her, but a kick to his stomach sent him sprawling to the ground. Lena continued cutting her face, dragging it along her forehead and down to her ears. He leapt up to stop her again, but again and again she managed to keep him away while continuing to slice her flesh. "Lena!" cried a voice from the woods. Silas distracted him for a moment as he came running into the clearing from behind Arthur. "I heard a scream," he said, approaching, and then noticed the knife in Lena's face and the blood streaming down her neck. "Lena!" he cried. He ran quickly towards her, glancing at Arthur along the way. He paused a few feet behind Arthur, who stood between them as the horrible sounds of Lena's knife still working down her face filled his ears and rendered his legs immobile. Silas stared blank-faced at Arthur for a moment, then dug into his pocket without looking down. He pulled out a much larger knife than Lena's and plunged it into his own cheek, beginning to cut along the same grotesque pattern she had. Arthur noticed the sudden silence from behind him and turned. He didn't want to see what Lena had done, but he couldn't stop himself. His brain screamed to flee as quickly as possible, but something buried deep within compelled him to look. He beheld a bloody, mangled mess of musculature. Her eyelids remained, though she didn't blink. Her nose was gone, as were her lips, revealing 2 rows of small teeth. The sounds of Silas continuing to slice echoed behind him as Arthur's eyes traveled down Lena's body. At her side, he saw what remained of her face. She lifted her arm and held it up to him. It looked like He wanted to scream, but no sound escaped. Instead, he ran. He ran as fast as his legs would carry him back to the cottage, pulling his mask back over his face as he went. Alara was peeling husks from some corn when Arthur stumbled into the yard. He collapsed to the ground, and she rushed over. The inside of his mask was drenched with tears, and he struggled to breathe. "Arthur, what's wrong?" she asked, kneeling in front of him. Her fingers drifted to the untied twine at the bottom of his neck. "Oh no," she whispered. Did she see your face?" "They're still alive," he choked out. "We can take them out of the woods. It's too late for them, son, I'm sorry." Arthur cried violently for another few moments, then looked at Alara. "When you said something bad would happen if someone saw my face, you didn't mean something bad would happen to Meek, did you?" Arthur sat in the kitchen while Alara brought him a cool glass of water. He could tell she was stalling, but he didn't care. Everything felt wrong, and nothing she said would make it better. She sat in front of him and took his hand. "I didn't want to tell you. I hoped I would never have to." She looked from side to side, then back at him. "In the town I grew up in, a small place on the other side of these woods, there were stories of things in the forest. Things that only showed themselves when they wanted to be seen. Spirits, ghosts, monsters. The old folk had a name for this particular brand of spirits that I can't quite remember," she continued, "but us in town always just called them face takers." Arthur's heart stopped beating for a moment. Folks said if you looked at their faces, they would take yours. All us kids figured they were just stories, meant to keep us from wandering too far into the woods. That's what adults do, right? Tell kids fibs to keep them from getting hurt. That's what I learned to do, Arthur. And I'm wondering if it was right. I'm wondering if I should have just told you this stuff from the beginning." She sighed. Arthur wanted to speak, but his mind couldn't form the words. "I went most of my life believing that there was no such thing as magic, and things were only the way you saw them," Alara said before pausing and looking at him. "One day, I was walking in the woods, just trying to clear my head. I might have wandered farther than I should have, but I grew up around these trees. I knew how to find my way back. As I was about to turn around, I noticed a man a few yards away from me, off the trail. I didn't think anything of it at first. Figured he was out hunting or something like that, but when he turned to me, his face was missing, cut clean off. Took everything except his teeth and ears." Arthur's hands began to shake. He didn't want to believe anything she was saying, but the image of Lena's skinless face refused to leave his mind. I started walking backwards, thinking, this man must have lost his mind. But it began to occur to me that maybe all those stories I thought were nonsense actually held some truth. She looked at him, then away. It was the first time Arthur had ever heard her curse. I kept moving away from the man when I saw this small body facing away from me, a few yards away, off the trail. A child, no older than 2 or 3, completely naked in the woods by themselves. I walked towards them, thinking they might be in danger from the man. Then I saw it. A clump of skin on the ground in a pile like some messed up anthill. The holes for his eyes were the only thing I saw before turning away. I didn't know what to do. I thought about just leaving you out there, but then you started to cry. A painful cry that broke my heart. I couldn't have kids of my own, but... She swallowed hard. I wrapped my outer shirt over your head and picked you up, and when you wrapped your tiny arms around my neck, I knew that I had to protect you. So I just kept walking deeper and deeper into the woods, not knowing what to do, but hoping I'd figure it out along the way. She had answered the first question he had without him having to utter a word. I don't know who left you there or why, she said. I wondered if your real parents would ever come looking for you, and maybe that's partly why I wanted us to stay as hidden as we could. Her eyes drifted to him. There was a long, heavy silence. Arthur, she began, I don't want to ask, son, but I think I have to. When your friend did what she did you like it? When your friend did what she did. Of course he didn't like it, Arthur thought as he wandered back through the woods. He hadn't had time to examine his emotions at the moment, though. He thought he was terrified, but had he confused excitement for terror? The sun was beginning to set when he made it to the spot where Lena and Silas lay. They were both on their backs, their bodies still against the bright green grass. He warily approached, not wanting to see what had become of their faces, but unable to stop himself. He stopped just shy of their bodies and noticed something on the ground. A small mound of pink flesh stared back at him, and he knew it was her face. He didn't move for a few moments, his stomach churning at the idea of what her face might look like, detached from her body. Still, he moved towards it, seeing a few insects had begun picking away at the flesh. He picked it up, dusting the small creatures away, while feeling the softness of the flesh between his fingers. As the sticky blood coated his palms, he felt the side of his mouth begin to curl into a smile. He gasped and dropped Lena's face before running away from the scene, wiping the blood from his hands onto his pants. Arthur sat in his room staring at the wall for a long time. His body still buzzed from the feeling of Lena's face between his fingers. The fear and sickness had all disappeared, replaced instead with an elation he had never experienced. His body felt light, and the constant fear and anxiety that usually filled his brain had gone away. He felt confident and more intelligent, though it seemed impossible at the time. He sat with the feeling, not wanting it to leave. However, when it did, he felt worse than he ever had. A dark cloud seemed to surround his head as his body felt heavy and bound to the space around him. The realization that he would never see his best friend again came rushing into him. And the guilt of knowing he had caused her death made him wish he were the one lying lifeless in the grass instead of her. He cried for the next few hours until it felt like he had no tears left. Alara had come by to check on him several times, but avoided entering his room. "Just let me know if you need something, okay?" she asked once. He heard her move to her room and shut the door. She had never closed her room at night before that day. He could tell there was something different about her, and it became more evident over the next few days. She no longer walked around the cottage like an authority figure, but more like someone trying to avoid eye contact with a mean dog. She never brought up the incident again, and he was thankful for it. The guilt of killing Lena never truly dissipated, though neither did the remembrance of that ecstasy he experienced afterward. It created a temptation within him to go out and find someone else to whom he could show his face. It became a regular craving, usually. It was like one might crave sugar after a long time without any, but some nights it was almost comparable to starvation. It became so bad that one day he saw Alara working outside, busy and distracted with chores. He approached from behind and started removing his mask without thinking. Alara heard him approach and spun around, dropping the garden hose she'd been using. The look of fear on her face, the woman who had ensured his survival, who had loved him despite knowing he was a monster. Seeing her that terrified of him, it almost hurt worse than Lena. Alara slept with a chair against her door that night, and for most nights after. While she was sleeping one night, Arthur crept into her craft room, spotting a large needle she used on leather. He grabbed it, taking a thick roll of twine as well. Lena's face flashed in his mind. First, her face the first time he had met her, followed by the last time. He knew it was horrible, but his emotions and his brain weren't matching, and at the time, he felt like his brain was right. If the cravings weren't going to stop, then he needed to prevent his mask from ever coming off again. He took the needle and twine and held them to his neck for a moment before taking a deep breath. The needle punctured his skin, then the mask leather. He cringed as the twine slid through his flesh and felt every centimeter of its rough edges scraping the inside of his skin. Lines of crimson fell from every puncture in his neck. The harsh stinging he had felt when he first punctured his skin had become a dull pain. For the first time in his life, the mask felt warm and comforting. He breathed in its leathery smell before lying back on his bed, thankful he had never hurt anyone like he had hurt Lena. His bed was much more comfortable these days. Arthur had invested in a weighted blanket and a goose-down pillow, and the difference was truly noticeable. In a month, it would be 10 years since he had left the woods. Alara had died a year prior, and being out there by himself, well, it was lonelier than he could describe, though. On some nights, he would give a lot of money for the peace and quiet of the wilderness. His apartment overlooked a bustling downtown area, and while the view was amazing, the incessant noise of the city could be a bit overwhelming at times. Thank goodness for the noise-canceling headphones his ex-girlfriend had gifted him for Christmas last year. Though it was his day off, he decided to do some cleaning. He never got around to hiring a new cleaner, and the place had become a bit of a sty. He went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror for a moment, seeing his night mask staring back at him. It was more lucid than any of the masks he had growing up, but thick enough to prevent him from seeing his actual face. This mask was milky white and made of a thin plastic. It only covered his face, leaving his hair, ears, and neck visible. The scars where he had sewn that old mask on had become a pale white over the years. No one ever asked about them, though. Only a few people had ever seen him with his shirt off. Lining the bathroom counter were several other masks, ones he had made himself from materials collected over the years. He had been perfecting them since leaving the woods. He was able to get away with crude masks for a while, using the excuse of having bad scarring, but he realized how much better it was to get close to someone before doing what he had to do. And people wanted something they could truly see. Eyes that reacted to them, lips that moved, cheeks that wrinkled when smiling. He thought he had almost perfected his masks. They contoured to every crease of his face and matched his skin color perfectly. Only sometimes would someone notice something off about his face. Maybe they would spot a plasticky sheen to the synthetic skin or see makeup lines around his lips or eyes. They would only give a look of vague concern and continue about their day, wondering if what they saw was only their imagination. He decided to clean his room first, starting with the mess of clothes in the closet. Before getting started, though, he decided to reminisce and dragged out the leather box near the back corner of the closet. He placed it on his bed and pulled the flap open. A smile crept up his cheeks. He had managed to preserve most of them, with the latest ones being those of his ex-girlfriend and the cleaner. There were 23 in total, but he had plans for several more, so he was probably going to need to find a better storage system. Seeing all the empty eye sockets and jagged edges of the faces always made him feel a slight amount of the elation he had felt upon taking them. It also made him sad, though. Sad that he hadn't gone back for her share, face before the forest took it. Clara, a young girl, was a familiar face at Grand Builder's warehouse. Her father, a carpenter, often brought her along on his frequent supply runs. One evening, just as the last closing announcements echoed through the cavernous store, Clara and her dad were making their final selections. In the bustling rush to beat the closing bell, Clara was accidentally left behind, a small figure swallowed by the vast aisles as her father departed. The sudden silence that followed was unnerving. It seemed every employee had vanished into thin air. Alone in the dark, she first tried the store phone, hoping to call for help, but it was dead, cut off for the night. Resourceful, Clara made her way to the electronics aisle, grabbing a pack of batteries and a heavy-duty flashlight to pierce the gloom. The beam cut through the shadows, revealing the eerie quiet of the place. As she swept the light around, her breath hitched. Scrawled in a viscous, reddish liquid on a display wall was a chilling invitation. "Come play with me, Bestie." Though a shiver ran down her spine, she rationalized it must be paint, given her proximity to the art and decor aisle. Following the sinister trail of crimson drips, Clara ventured deeper into the deserted warehouse. The drips led her through winding aisles until she reached the timber yard, where neatly stacked planks of wood towered like ancient trees. There, nestled between the lumber piles, stood a small playhouse, expertly constructed from the very wood around it, and beside it, a faint, almost transparent outline of a girl shimmered in the flashlight's beam. Hesitantly, Clara approached the spectral figure. She began to play, talking to the ethereal girl as if she were real, drawing comfort from the imagined presence. Then, a whisper, chillingly clear, reached her ears. "Open the door." With a trembling hand, Clara pushed open the miniature playhouse door. In an instant, the world shifted. They were no longer in the timber yard, but in the cold, metallic expanse of the power tools and workshop supplies section. The floor was a horrifying tableau of carnage, a gruesome mosaic of bloody drills, saws, and wrenches scattered among lifeless forms. The transparent girl leaned close to Clara, her voice a relentless, insidious stream of whispers. As the words permeated her mind, Clara felt a terrifying transformation begin. Her own form grew translucent, fading, until she was as ethereal and silent as her new companion. And so it is said that the two spectral girls now forever wander the deserted aisles of Grand Builder's warehouse, their playful whispers echoing in the dark. The quiet of my apartment was broken by the insistent ring of my phone, just moments after I'd stepped through the door. Seeing an unfamiliar number flash on the screen, I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, the familiar chime signaled a new message had arrived. The automated voice gave way to a man's stern tone. "Good evening, Mrs. Olson. This is Detective Miller with the County Sheriff's Office. I'm calling to inform you that your husband was involved in an incident. Please return my call at..." A cold wave of shock washed over me. I had to replay the message, my hands trembling slightly, to jot down the detective's number. "Detective Miller," the voice on the other end confirmed. "This is Mrs. Olson," I managed, my voice a little unsteady. "I just received your message about Robert." The detective began to recount the details, but I couldn't bear to hear it all at once. "Is he going to be all right?" I interrupted, a desperate plea in my tone. "He's stable, but unconscious, as of the last update," came his somber reply. "Which hospital did they take him to?" I pressed. "St. Jude's Medical Center," he informed me. "Thank you," I said, and ended the call abruptly, needing to move, to act. I rushed into the emergency room, my heart hammering. "How can I assist you?" The intake nurse at the main desk inquired as I approached, her expression calm amidst the chaos. "My husband was brought in after an accident," I blurted out. "What is his name, please?" "Robert Olson." She swiftly typed the name into her system. "Ah, yes. Mr. Olson has been taken to the operating theater for surgery," she explained. "I'll arrange for someone to escort you upstairs." The nurse rose and disappeared behind a set of double doors, returning moments later with a young assistant. "Follow me," the assistant said, his gesture indicating I should accompany him. He led me to a discreet staff-only elevator, swiping a keycard to grant us access. When the doors opened on the appropriate floor, he pointed down the quiet corridor. "The nurse's station is just there. They'll provide you with more information." "Thank you," I murmured, my gratitude tinged with urgency, and hurried towards the station. At the station, I introduced myself and explained my predicament. They confirmed Robert was indeed in surgery. Then a kind nurse guided me to a secluded waiting area. The next hour stretched interminably, each minute a test of my nerves, until she reappeared, a brown paper bag in her hand. "What's this?" I asked, my voice thin, as she offered it to me. "Your husband's personal effects," she replied softly. I took the bag, my fingers brushing the cool paper, and peered inside. My gaze immediately landed on Robert's wallet. I pulled it out, flipped it open, and began to search, my heart thumping with anticipation. Finally, I found the small, folded piece of paper I was seeking. I carefully removed it, unfolding it to reveal the intricate symbol. Why didn't you work? I whispered, my eyes fixed on the drawn image. I had meticulously copied the death hex, every line and curve, exactly as depicted in the ancient spellbook. It should have been effective. It should have been effective. It still might'a. A flicker of hope, cold and dark, ignited within me as I slipped the hex back into the wallet. They haven't finished the surgery yet. Suh. Alara's mistress pointed a frail finger at the nearly empty platter. Get Lord Vorlagmore. Alara bowed her head, heart sinking, and hurried towards the scullery. More, or barely clinging to our reserves, hissed one of the others as Alara relayed the demand. That glutton will drain us all, another grumbled. Will he ever know true satisfaction? A third whispered. The scullery buzzed with the familiar lament. Alara held up the small, battered comm unit she'd guarded for days. Please, everyone, today's the day. Just a few more hours. What did Kalen say? Did he locate a way out? Alara gazed at the device. He found a crumbling vent. He believes he can squeeze through. The room stirred with renewed energy, a spark of shared hope igniting in their weary eyes. Alara felt it too, a fragile blossom in the desolate confines of their existence. She retrieved the platter, now piled high with meager rations, and returned to the grand dining hall. This, she promised herself, would be the final meal she ever served the tyrant and his mother. Lord Vorlag finished his portion, rose from the table with a guttural grunt, and lumbered out. Madame Kale, a shadow of her former self, shuffled meekly behind him. This was it. Alara and the others carried the bare platters back to the scullery, where their small band had assembled. She lifted the comm unit, her thumb hovering over the power switch. Kalen, are you there? A long, agonizing pause. Then silence. Kalen? She tried again, her voice barely a whisper. Still silence. A low murmur rippled through the group, a tremor of doubt. Before Alara could repeat her call, a static crackle pierced the stillness. Alara, I'm here. A wave of profound relief washed over her, making her shoulders slump in gratitude. We're all prepared. We can leave tonight. I'm on the other side. I'll await you there. They exchanged glances, wide smiles breaking through their grime-stained faces. A feeling they hadn't known since their capture, a raw, vibrant hope, surged through them. Alara slipped the comm unit into her pocket, her gaze sweeping over the group before her, her friends. No, more than that, her family. They drew close, a tight circle of arms embracing, a silent understanding passing between them. Words were unnecessary, their shared suffering and burgeoning hope spoke volumes. After a long moment, they broke apart and turned towards the scullery door. Then, Ilara's blood ran cold, her stomach plummeted, the door stood ajar. Had they forgotten to secure it? Impossible. She had personally ensured it was latched, bolted even. Yet, it was undeniably open, and through the narrow crack, a single dark eye, cold and utterly devoid of life, stared back at them. Lord Vorlag. A wave of nausea churned within Alara. Not one of them dared to move, to speak, to even draw a breath. The master tapped the door with a thick finger, and it groaned open further. He bent low, his unnaturally prominent spine a sharp ridge beneath his tunic to squeeze his bulk through the frame. His gaze swept the terrified faces in the room. Slowly, he reached into his trousers and withdrew something small, black, and instantly recognizable to them all. A comm unit. He lifted it to his lips, pressed the button. A crackle, eerily familiar, echoed through the suffocating silence. Alara, are you there? The voice, it sounded just like, oh, by the gods. He spoke again, deliberately, slowly, a flawless imitation of Kalen's voice. I'll await you, on the other side. Clara found herself taken aback when Arthur, her usually pragmatic husband, proposed a date night. The words were so uncharacteristic, Clara almost thought she'd misheard. A date night? Arthur, are you feeling all right? She asked, a faint smile playing on her lips. He simply chuckled, admitting the spontaneity was unusual, blaming it on an idle Friday evening with nothing else on their schedule. A pleasant warmth spread through Clara. It was nice to feel wanted in this way. "Where are we thinking of going?" she inquired, envisioning a quaint bistro or a stroll under the city lights. Arthur's expression took on a peculiar cast. "Going? Nowhere. I've got a film for us to watch right here. I'll grab the popcorn." Clara deflated. A quiet dinner at the Ember Room or a walk along the waterfront had been her silent wishes, knowing full well her aversion to screen entertainment. Resigned, Clara settled onto the sofa. Arthur soon joined her, a ridiculously oversized bucket of popcorn balanced in his lap. "What exactly are we watching?" she asked, feigning a flicker of interest. "Remember my recent creative endeavors?" he announced, a proud glint in his eye. "I've made a film." The revelation was as unexpected as it was unsettling. He had created a movie and never mentioned it, and now this was his idea of a date? So peculiar. As the opening credits flickered onto the screen in their cozy apartment, a cold dread began to seep into Clara's very being. There, undeniably, were faces of acquaintances who had recently vanished from their social circle. And then there was Liam, the man she had been secretly seeing. Clara's gaze slowly shifted to Arthur, who sat beside her, a picture of blissful contentment. She tore her eyes back to the screen, clamping a hand over her mouth to stifle a wave of nausea. The film unfolded into a grotesque tapestry of violence. Her friends, one after another, met horrific ends. Liam's demise was the final, brutal crescendo, a sickening tableau of screams, blood, and tears that screamed of agonizing reality. This wasn't a cinematic creation. This was a chilling chronicle of actual events. The unanswered texts, the mysterious disappearances, it all clicked into a horrifying, undeniable truth. Clara sprang from the couch, a choked, guttural cry escaping her lips. "Arthur, how could you? How could you?" His laugh was a harsh, joyless sound. "You made your choices, Clara. Bad deeds invite suffering. Isn't it a magnificent production? I crafted it for you." His gaze turned to steel, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Attempt to leave, and I assure you, your story will end here. Now resume your place. Be the devoted wife you vowed to be." Alex had been lost in the serene afterglow of a near-perfect day, a soft smile gracing her lips as she reflected on her accomplishments. A sudden, jarring thump against her front door shattered the tranquility. Quickly wiping the blissful expression from her face, she swung the door open to confront Beatrice, her perpetually busybody neighbor, the type who always spearheaded every neighborhood initiative. "Hello, Beatrice," Alex managed, the warmth absent from her tone. "Hello, Alex. I see you're well." Beatrice stated rather than asking, her gaze fixed on the stack of papers in her hand. "I don't know if you've noticed, but over 10 children have vanished from Willow Creek in the last 6 months." As Beatrice spoke, a frantic pulse throbbed in Alex's chest. Her entire perfect day had centered on those very disappearances, a dark secret she cherished for her ambition. Her thoughts began to spin. Did Beatrice know what Alex had been doing? The lengths she would go to achieve her fantasies? "Of course I noticed, Beatrice," Alex replied, her voice taut, trying to conceal the growing anxiety that gnawed at her. "Well, as always, I've taken it upon myself to organize the neighborhood in a grid search of some of the local areas. We'd love to help in any way we can, those poor families." The emphasis Beatrice placed on poor families felt like a direct accusation. Alex was certain Beatrice knew what she had been up to that very day. "Great, Beatrice. Listen, I have to go. I have something important to take care of. Let me know the day and time, and I'll see if I'm free." Alex slammed the door before Beatrice could utter another word. She practically flew up the stairs to her private study, intent on completing her work before Beatrice's meddling could derail it or try to stop her. A quick, distracted glance out her window turned into a frozen stare. Something in dear old Beatrice's attic window caught her eye. The drapes had shifted, revealing a small, pale face pressed against the glass. Alex instantly recognized one of the missing children's faces from the flyers in Beatrice's hand. Though she couldn't hear them, the child's desperate plea for help, seemed to echo in Alex's mind. Her laptop lay open, displaying the half-finished article she had aggressively pursued, hounding the grieving families for details. Her grand plans of becoming a celebrated journalist in Los Angeles, working for the Globe, her Alex Jones-esque tactics to secure her story, her fantasies of stardom, all of it crumbled into insignificance. All that mattered now was the chilling truth. Sweet Beatrice was responsible for the missing children, and Alex was now responsible for saving them. The storm raged fiercely that evening, lashing rain against the sturdy walls of Silas's secluded lighthouse. When the bell clanged, a startling summons above the din, Silas peered through the peephole. It was a habitual gesture, though he often forgot its peculiar inversion. Anyone outside could observe the interior of the lighthouse with chilling clarity, while Silas himself saw only a distorted blur. As expected, he discerned nothing through the murky lens. Upon unlatching the heavy door, however, the threshold was empty, save for a single, unassuming package. It was an ordinary delivery box, much like those from online retailers, yet etched upon its surface were these stark words. 1. Do not open the package. Silas, wanting no part in unexpected drama or unsettling revelations, made no move to retrieve it. He simply left the sodden parcel on his doorstep, allowing the relentless rain to claim it, and secured the door once more. 2 hours later, the insistent clang of the doorbell echoed through the lighthouse again. Silas hesitated, but curiosity, or perhaps dread, eventually drew him back to the door. This time, the package lay ripped open, its contents exposed, and an otherworldly man stood hunched over it. On the reverse side of the torn cardboard, Silas could now see a second inscription, 2. The package opens itself. The man was a horrifying sight, a creature of sharp angles and unnatural pallor. He lunged, a sudden brutal attack. Silas, through sheer instinct and a hidden strength, managed to quell the initial assault, yet the man persisted, brandishing some kind of strange alien weapon. He pressed his attack with unwavering ferocity, determined to overwhelm Silas. Silas pleaded, begging for mercy, for understanding, for the man to simply leave him be. But the strange being was deaf to his pleas, relentless in his aggression. He would not stop. He would not listen. So, Silas ate him, pausing only to ask, "Didn't you have a look through the peephole first?" For within the confines of his lighthouse, Silas knew no one could truly threaten him. Only those who dared to arrive faced the true danger. Come, traveler. Silas's hunger is unending. Caleb was a drifter, crisscrossing the sprawling lands for over a year. His journey had begun abruptly after his beloved had left him for a more promising suitor. Caleb plummeted into the arms of despair, chasing oblivion in drink and drugs, quickly hitting rock bottom. His parents, realizing the gravity of his situation, intervened just in time, pulling him out of the mess. He was truly grateful for their love. One morning, at breakfast, Caleb announced, "I need to go for a walk, to think, to get myself together." He pulled on his worn leather jacket, threw a backpack over his shoulder, hugged his parents, promised to be well, and set off. The road stretched long and endless before him. He lost count of the dawns and dusks he'd witnessed, walking along desolate stretches of highway. As his feet tapped the asphalt, he often wondered, "Am I truly destined to walk this entire path alone? And what will I ever leave behind in this world?" Hollow. He walked along the roadside, toward the setting sun, holding out his thumb when he heard a car roar up behind him. By the sound of it, the vehicle wasn't planning to slow down. Not that Caleb cared. He was used to sleeping in fields beneath the open sky. He kept walking, not looking back, following where the sunset had vanished. Night fell on the road abruptly, and what Caleb saw surprised him. The road was barely visible, yet the sky above burned with an impossible multitude of stars. He kept walking, deep in thought, when he saw a light ahead by the roadside. Could it be? Caleb thought with a flicker of hope, picking up his pace. It was an old, retired touring coach. Its door was open, and the cabin lights cast a soft glow. Around it, not a soul. "Hey," "Anyone here?" Caleb shouted. No answer, just silence. He walked around the bus, staring into the darkness, expecting someone to appear. But no one came. He was utterly alone. Caleb was exhausted, and ignoring the strangeness of the scene, he climbed into the coach and crashed onto the back seats, passing out almost immediately. When he woke up, it was still night outside. He had no watch, and the desire for sleep had vanished. He stepped out of the coach and figured he was probably dreaming inside a dream. Rising over the horizon was a moon so colossal, his knees buckled at the sight, and he fell on his backside on the dusty roadside, mouth wide open. "Holy shit," Caleb whispered. And just then, he saw the feline, a regular, fluffy sable and ivory cat with amber eyes, sitting on a rock. "How long are you going to stare at me like that?" A voice resonated inside Caleb's head. He said nothing, glancing back and forth between the moon and the cat. "Lucky I passed by and saw this coach," the voice continued. "Otherwise, you'd be stuck here for a long time." "Here's where?" Caleb asked, locking eyes with the cat, a prickle of unease unsettling him. "You don't remember?" the cat said, its voice purring mentally. "No." Caleb's head started spinning. "The truck. The one that didn't slow down, remember?" the cat asked. "That reckless driver hit you full speed. Didn't even notice. Right now, your body's lying on the roadside bleeding out. While your spirit rests here," the cat added with a hint of amusement. "So what? What am I supposed to do now?" Caleb asked, his voice hollow. "Start the coach," the cat said out loud. "Get behind the wheel. Key's already in." Caleb gave a strained laugh. "Want a ride?" "Indeed, wanderer." "Our paths converge," said the cat, and it sprang into the coach. Caleb got up, swaying, not fully understanding what had just happened or where he was. He looked one last time at the immense moon in awe, dusted himself off, and climbed into the coach. He awkwardly turned the key, started the engine, while the cat watched him with something like pity, and they drove off into the deepening mystery as the second, equally vast orb began to rise behind them over the horizon.